Hey, yo.
If I can be serious for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Acknowledge me.
What's going on, everybody? It's DB, your boy from the Sit Down Mars podcast, back at you with another episode of Territory Treasures. I want to thank everybody listening on Apple, Spotify, Audible, iHeartRadio, and SportzWire Radio, all those podcast platforms out there. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of Territory Treasures with Andre the Giant. If not, go back and check it out. And today we're going to be talking about Curt Henning. Well, Mr. Perfect, as we all know him by, of course, but what do we know and remember about Mr. Perfect, Curt Henning? I mean, obviously the big blonde, beautiful hair that he had, man. Jealous of that, man. It was beautiful, the towel that he brought to the ring, always synonymous with Mr. Perfect. We all see the video of him throwing it over his shoulder and Bobby Heenan catching it behind him. Always cool. Just added to the cool factor that towel did. I don't think I ever saw him wipe away perspiration or anything with it. So, yeah, it was definitely part of his cool factor. Chewing gum, he always spit that gum out and, would slap it away with his hands. You've tried it before. I've tried it. I tried it actually today. It's not as easy as it looks. It depends on the size of the gum. So shout out to him for basically nailing that every time he did come into the ring. And, we got to talk about the vignettes, the small videos that he did to show us how perfect he was. The WAB, would spotlight him. They had these sports stars in these vignettes with them. Like Wade Boggs, they'd show him hitting like a half-court shot. They'd show him throwing like a touchdown pass and turn around and catching it in the same throw. They show him hitting like long putts, half-court shots, bowling a perfect game, that kind of stuff. So just to show you how perfect he actually was in anything that he ever tried to do. So, these vignettes were perfect, and they were almost made for him, because I don't think I knew what a vignette was until, maybe Mr. Perfect came around. I mean, we seen him, but, it was what kind of like put him on the map. And we got to talk about the singlets that he wore, all kind of different colors. He was always trendy. They were kind of pastel, he always looked good in his singlet. They're always, pastel and bright, you know what I mean? So we all, definitely we're jealous of how he looked in that singlet, of course. And, we got to talk about the entrance music. The entrance music, iconic. We all knew who was coming to the ring when we heard this music. I mean, just iconic music. Absolute iconic music, man, for sure. So the entrance music, got us. Bobby Heenan was his manager. A lot of the times he was a manager himself, later on in his career, after the injuries started setting in. I mean, he could talk like a dream, right? His charisma, he had swag before we knew what swag was, his charisma was always on point for sure. And, which, added to his perfectionism, just the word perfect, makes me think of him every time I hear it. Simply perfect. When somebody says simply perfect, it just immediately goes to your mind of thinking of about Curt Henning. He came from a legendary family. His father and grandfather were legends, in the business. So, he came with the cumber of wrestling, and he already, kind of had it, in his family legacy, so to speak. We got to talk about his smug face. He always had that look on his face, just make you want to punch him, right? You know what I mean? He was just good at being a heel and good at pissing you off, And I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the perfect plex. You tried it on your brothers and sisters growing up. You might even tried it on somebody, just the last week. So, a fisherman suplex into a pin. I did this on all my brothers and family members. It was a cool finish, man. Fisherman suplex, and he held it. Pulled the bridge up. Really, 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 really cool stuff there from Mr. Perfect. Born on March 1958 in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, to Larry the Axe, of course, and Irene. His real name was Curtis Michael Henning. And you got to hear this, guys. You got to listen to the studs that Curt Henning went to high school with in Robbinsdale. This just blows my mind. He went to school with all these people: Rick Rude, Tom Zink, Nikita Koloff, Barry Darso, and Road Warrior Hawk. Now, you talk about something in the water up there, man. Holy shit. Like, so many wrestlers went to Robbinsdale, Minnesota. Big area up there for wrestling too, man. It was really cool. But to be able to say you went to high school with all those studs, like, geez, I bet they were good at all kind of sports, man. He was trained by his dad, obviously, Vern Gagne. He was big in Minnesota. Now, he started out in AWA territory, and that's where the territory treasure comes in. He was big up in AWA, American Wrestling Association, up in the North Midwest area, basically, Minnesota, all around that area. Debuted in 1980 as Cool Curt Henning. Not too much off the path there, because he definitely was cool. 6'3", 260 pounds, looked like $1 million. Not the Young Bucks, but looked like $1 million for sure. He was always in great shape. He had that very wrestler looking body. He got really popular in AWA too. He won tag titles with Scott Hall, which was his first title win. If you don't know who Scott Hall is, that was pre-Razor Ramon era. So, and then he was on the WWF in 1981, back to AWA in 83 through 88, and he defeated Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA title in 1987, and he turned heel while doing it. And so that was his first big title there in AWA. He ended up having big stints in WWF, AWA, WCW, and even in TNA for a little bit. Not only a good wrestler, man, good commentator, good manager. I think his commentating is kind of underrated, honestly, man, because always enjoyed him, being very heelish, on the mic. He was great at getting heat. He's probably better heel than a face. It's probably one of those guys just kind of born to be a heel. He seemed to more just have that like smug, a face. So whenever he did turn face, sometimes it's always kind of hard to believe. So he was such a good heel, He feuded with, let's talk about WWE, WWF highlights. I mean, he feuded with the Hulkster over the WWF title. He won the Intercontinental belt twice and had a very long reign in 1991. And he's one of those guys that I always think of when I say, hey, man, we're talking about the old IC belt, like how it looked good on people. Like Brett and Curt Henning, maybe like Owen Hart too, man. Like it just looked great on those guys. Yeah, it looked good on Ultimate Warrior too, but I mean, it just looked like it fit on Curt for sure. But so 1988 was the start of the perfect vignettes that we were just talking about. These vignettes were always the best, man. They were interesting. You could see a sports star on there. Like I said, you could see him, do things just so like how he truly was perfect. WWF 2, you might remember they paired him with the genius Lanny Poffo for a little while, and that was cool. One of his IC belt runs was that he won was in a tournament after Ultimate Warrior vacated the title after winning the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 6, and he relinquished the IC belt, and Curt would be there to pick up the pieces and run with that belt, obviously. So, and a lot of times we remember, Curt being with Bobby Heenan most of the time when he had a manager. Do you guys remember when he managed Ric Flair in 1992 as the WWF champion? So not only as champion, he had some cool spots as manager too. You might have heard this one too, man. I mean, this right here takes some balls. He was in a famous fight with Brock Lesnar on the famous plane ride from hell, where they put shaving cream on Brock Lesnar's head. I mean, that right there is just ballsy enough. I mean, you got a set of nuts on you if you can do that. So shout out to Curt, man. Do you guys remember the 2002 Rumble, man? He was one of the last three left there, man. It was cool, to see. I know Triple H was one of the last three in there with him, but super cool to see him come back. We all remember his son, Curtis Axel, wrestled in WWE. He was part of Legacy with Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes. And so when it come to be Hall of Fame time, Curt was inducted by Wade Boggs, famous third base baseball player for the Yankees, Toronto Blue Jays, I think Tampa, that kind of stuff. They were good friends, man. They were really tight friends. So that was kind of cool. Maybe one of the first times I've seen somebody from sports induct a wrestler to the Hall of Fame. In WCW, man, he challenged for the WWE title on pay-per-view, and he did the same in TNA. So he had some good runs there. Bret Hart, I mean, if anybody, the legend Bret, he called him one of the greatest to ever live. So I just feel like if Bret puts you over, man, you're up there. You're and if he don't put you over like Goldberg, you're at the bottom. So. But one of the best all around, absolutely. Fire promos. Another thing I thought was cool about Curt Henning, man, he had these like one-liners that were just sweet, man. He could zing you in a heartbeat, and he always had something to say, man, which was good. Another thing about Curt, man, he was looked up, by his peers. A lot of people, will put Curt in the greatest ever conversation, and that comes from a lot of wrestlers. So that right there, puts him up on a pedestal for sure. Injuries forced him to retire, obviously, early 2000s, and we lost Curt in February of 2003. 44 years old, man, way too soon. I feel like he still had some wrestling in him. I still feel like his legacy in wrestling could have even went on. But it's so funny that a man associated with one word is over so much, in wrestling. I mean, you say perfect in wrestling, we always think of Mr. Perfect. His entrance music called The Perfect Twist, The Perfect Plex, The Perfect Everything, and now that I've gotten older, man, it's really cool to see how kind of like perfect he really was, and go back and watch those matches and seeing him in that IC belt run, and just amazing, and just the comfort that he had to talk, to wrestle, to everything. He did come from a family, but he just had all the genetics. He had it all, you know what I mean? Like, he really did have it all. So I see how he ended up, coming to the perfect moniker. All right, so I'm going to get you out of here on this, guys. My spotlight segment today about Curt Henning was his WCW run, man, 1999. So funny part about Curt, man, if you know wrestling, you probably know where I'm going to go with this. But if not, man, this be good news to you to check this out. So Curt in WCW, they had a lot of crazy ideas and a lot of things that they thought would work. And, this did kind of get over in a funny way. But Curt was part of a heel stable / country music band called the West Texas Outlaws. And then it was quickly changed over to the West Texas Rednecks. And in that group with Curt was Barry and Kendall Windham, Bobby Duncombe Jr., and then Virgil would be in there later on. They came up with this song that's called Rap is Crap. And it was one of their hit songs as a group, band, faction, whatever. He was feuding with an rap artist called Master P that was in WCW at the time. And so feast your ears, ladies and gentlemen, on this chart-topping hits from Curt Henning. Check it out.
There's only one thing that I hate, 'cause it's a bunch of crap. I hate rap. I like NASCAR racing, Richard Petty's still the king. Yeah, they call me a redneck, but you know that's a beautiful thing. There's only one thing that I hate, 'cause it's a bunch of crap. I hate rap.
All right, so enough of that. But so now you got the idea of what the West Texas Rednecks were all about. They did have another song. I'm not going to say it, but it was called Good Old Boys, if you want to go and look that up. So want to thank you guys for listening today. I want to thank everybody listening on Apple, Spotify, all those podcast platforms out there. And thank you guys for tuning in to the second installment of DB's Territory Treasures. So to put it all in a little nutshell here, well, he was perfect at wrestling, perfect in promos, perfect in a lot of things that he did, not so perfect at singing country music and singing country songs about how he hates rap. But I'll tell you what, man, I think Curt Henning is going to live in a lot of our minds, for quite a long time, because I know as long as I live, anytime anybody says perfect or simply perfect, I'm going to think of Mr. Perfect, Curt Henning. Ladies and gentlemen, I am DB. I want to thank you guys for checking this out so much. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you guys go and check out the Sit Down Marks podcast. We're going to be back next week with episode coming up. We're going to be talking about the up and rising stars, who's up to get signed in the world of wrestling coming up. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time when we dive into another Territory Treasure.